Hey guys, welcome back to MIA Luxury Cars. Want to drift something rather out of the norm? Let's check out this 9 unexpectedly good drift cars. Ford MN12. It's no secret that the 4th gen or SN95 Mustang is pretty good at sliding around. Ford built the SN95 Mustang on the absolutely geriatric Fox platform, which used an archaic live rear axle. And a live rear axle is not the most ideal rear end for going into the control side. If only Ford had designed a similar platform during that time period with independent rear suspension, a front-mounted V8 and a crisp manual gearbox, except they did, and it's called the MN12. This chassis was used on the Thunderbird and a Cougar between 1988 and 1997, which also happens to do the exact amount of time that the Belgian avant-garde jazz band X-Legged Sally was active. And just like Mustang, you can get the T-Bird or the Cougar with a 289 or 302 V8. There was even a supercharged V6 Thunderbird called the Super Coupe. BMW E39, known as the 5 Series from the late 90s and early 2000s. This is one of the last true BMWs of the modern era. It was engineered to stimulate the pleasures of driving and refined motor vehicles. There's no fake engine noise, it is pumped into the speakers. The styling is subtle, understated. It also happens to slide real good around their corners. The E39 isn't a more common drift car. You could get it with the super reliable M54, straight 6, or even absolutely nasty M62 V8. Bunch of them came with manual transmissions, which is super cool for a big luxury boat like that. It doesn't happen a lot, and most importantly, these things are cheap. The only thing you need to do to one of these boys is weld the diff, since they didn't ever come with an LST from the factory. But it doesn't take much effort to get them sideways. They basically have a 50-50 weight distribution, and a long wheelbase makes it perfect for those comfy controlled slides that we all lust after. Chevy S10. The S10 is basically the American equivalent. It's small, it's lightweight, rear-wheel drive, and it puts down some pretty disc power straight up out of the little box. This truck is petite, to say the least. So even with a modest V6, it's definitely enough to give you a good time. And if you happen to want a little bit more power, baby, it's nothing to sweat your pants over. These things have plenty of room for engine swaps. These honest little trucks are surprisingly good platform to get you started with your new expensive drift buddy. Subaru Outback. This thing's got the greasy guts to deliver some big-time oversteer with just a few tweaks to the drivetrain. Most all-wheel drive cars are actually front-wheel drive cars most of the time, but Subaru uses a symmetrical all-wheel drive system that splits power through a fancy little center differential. What does this mean? It means that you can just weld up the center diff, delete your front axles, and you've got a rear-wheel drive Subaru. This thing looks like 100% sick when they're going sideways. Porsche 944. The 944 isn't your average P car. It's got an engine in the front, it's got a crap ton of power potentially, perfect 50-50 weight distribution. Now, a lot of you might be worried about the dropping a ton of cash on maintenance and repairs, but these are actually surprisingly affordable to buy and maintain for now. The FCRX7, an indestructibly legendary drift car, was basically just a JDM copy of the Porsche 944. And did I mention that the Porsche has a pop-up, up and down headlights? Porsche made a few other front ends and the cubes like the 924 and the 928, and they're all way cheaper than you think a classic Porsche would be. For years, people hated these cars. They said if the engine wasn't in the back, it's not a real Porsche. And thanks to that hate, you can find them way cheaper than you would expect. Chrysler Crossfire. The Chrysler Crossfire is one of the most underrated cars ever, and it's an American two-seater with Mercedes innards and a 6-speed manual transmission, and it's called the Crossfire, which is one of the most aggressively marketed board games ever. When the Crossfire came out, Chrysler was owned by Mercedes, so this car shared a tons of parts with the SLK, which is also a pretty neat car. It's powered by a V6 that puts out a fairly respectable 250 horsepower, which isn't bad for a car that only weighs 3,000 pounds. But apparently, this just wasn't good enough for American buyers, so the Crossfire was pretty much a sales flop. The styling is a pretty weird for that time. It looks like one of those wooden speedboats that rich guys pilot on their private lakes in Switzerland. But because of that, you can find these forgotten fact packs on the Greg's List, Facebook Martin's Place, and eBay Motors for dirt cheap. Mercedes C-Class W203. The second generation C-Class is known as the W203. It's called a chassis made, and it's basically Mercedes-Benz version of the BMW E46, and the E46 is a super popular drift car, so why not the W203? There was a ton of engine options in this chassis. 4 bangers, check. 6 bangers, 8 slangers, absolutely. Some of them were even supercharged, and unlike basically every other Mercedes in the history of Mercedes, the W203 was available with a 6-speed manual transmission. Infiniti J30. This is a car you wouldn't expect to be good at drifting, and most JDM cars are definitely expected to be good at drifting. There are tons of videos of basically every single rear-wheel drive Japanese car ever doing really cool sketchy stuff, but one Japanese boy you wouldn't expect this is this one, the Infiniti J30. It's kind of bloated, Oldsmobile-looking car, so it doesn't carry the same reputation as some of the more chiseled Japanese sports car. But underneath its blob-like appearance, it's a 210 horsepower V6, pretty much the same engine as the 300ZX. In other words, you've got the same tuning potential as the Z32. The J30 might not have come with a manual, but you can swap on in it pretty easily. Maybe you wanted to run in the standalone ECU. Maybe you want to freaking twin turbos swap one, raise the rev limiter and squeeze the few more horses out of that old VG. Tesla Model 3. The lower spec version of this car puts out 283 horsepower, and because they're electric motors, you get 330 pound-feet of torque instantly. The highest spec Model 3 gives you a bump of 450 horsepower. And again, that power is on demand. You don't have to worry about which gear you're in or what differential you have. You just press that lighting pedal and you're good to go. It's going to be a different experience than drifting and clapped out S14, but electric cars can be just as exciting. In a few years, you're going to see Model 3s get more and more affordable.